I've been chomping at the bit to get to this model build. Don't go away. Hello everybody and welcome to Fat Guy Productions. I am Paul, coming to you as always from beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. Yeah, I've been really wanting to get to this build for some time, but for one reason or another, I just kept putting it off. Well, no longer. Today, we're going to be tackling the AMT American LaFrance fire engine. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a very long video, probably at least 2 parts. So, let's quit talking and get to work. Okay, so here it is, the AMT American LaFrance fire engine kit. While I open her up and check the contents, let me just share a few things with you. First of all, this is a rotten kit. Flash, warped parts, odd assemblies, poor fitting parts, questionable instructions. It is indeed a sucky kit. But if you can push through, at the end of the day, you do get a pretty cool fire engine model. This is a kit I've built about 1,000,000 times, but in this build I'm breaking in a ton of new techniques and elements as I'm trying to build a replica of my first assigned unit with the Clark County Fire Department, Engine 14. Here is my old rig. This is an ALF Century Series engine. It's a 1000 model, but the kit is most likely an 800. This means I have a ton of work to do to convert this kit. I'll be using resin parts, photo etch, 3D printed stuff, and scratch building. I'll tell you right now, doing this many extra things to a bad kit like this is, well, kind of stupid. And as such, this build is very nearly going to kill me. Sadly, I vowed to make this the best build I have ever done. Award-winning quality. But I'm not sure I really actually reached that goal. I guess you'll all tell me in the comments. Anyhow, I'm committed, so I need to get building. So, let's bolt out of the starting gate and do something I've never done before. I'm going to cast my own redheads. The kit comes with horrible chrome lights, and even if they didn't suck, they don't match the configuration of Engine 14. I bought some lights from 2 vendors. From a company called 3 Inches Under, I bought some lights along with some other stuff. I wasn't impressed with the quality. I feel odd using the word quality here and skipped using most of their stuff that I ordered. I ordered another set of lights from a British company called KFS, and the lights were nice and even had details cast inside the shells, but they didn't have the style I needed. So I'm going to make my own. I made a short light bar from sheet styrene, and I used the kit lights and the ones I ordered to make my own molds. I used Oomoo by Smooth-On to make my own silicone mold because it's a simple product to use and makes a great clean mold. I created the internals from some sequins and styrene rod, positioned them in the molds, and then cast the lights from a clear resin that I tinted red. It took a few tries to get it the way I wanted, but in the end, the lights are one of my favorite parts of this build. The Oomoo is mixed simply with 1:1 ratio. It's very easy to work with, and you have a decent open time to work with it. Just make sure that you get the measurements right, and you thoroughly mix it. While you do need to get it thoroughly mixed, you also want to try to not introduce a bunch of air bubbles into it. Be sure to scrape the sides, the bottom of the cup, and even your stir stick. I have another video on casting resin parts, and I'll put a link below for you to look at that video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But I essentially make a mold box, stream the Oomoo in, and then set it aside to dry. After about 6 hours, the Oomoo has cured. I can take apart the mold box and see what I've got. Well, there it is, the mold. And it came out great, I really have to say. I'm super excited about it. As I mentioned earlier, now that I have the mold, I can position the internals and cast the resin. The resin takes 24 hours to dry, so once cast, I just set it aside. And now that everything is cured, I can go ahead and take the parts out of the mold and see if I'm met with success. Well, so far everything is cured, everything looks right, everything is red, everything is transparent, and I'm getting a look at my first light, and man, it looks great. I am so happy about this. I cannot believe I just did this. This is going to be a home run. I'm so excited at this point. And here are all my lights that I made. With the lights cast, I can go ahead and put them aside and start the build. As with all models, even ones you have built a million times, it's important to still practice good habits. I review the instructions, the parts, and I begin to develop a build plan in my mind. This is super important here as I'm replacing 1/3 of the kit with a resin 1000 series cab, and I'm scratch building another 1/3. I like to build then paint, so I take the sub-assemblies as far as possible to be able to paint them as a whole unit. As is the case with most vehicle kits, the build begins with the engine, in this case a V8 Turbo Detroit diesel. Parts are cut from the sprues with my beloved Tamiya sprue cutters. I clean off the exceptionally great amount of flash and also residue from the sprues, and I test fit everything before gluing. For most builds, I turn to Tamiya extra thin cement. But on this build, because of the many problems I've had with it in the past, I'll be using the Tamiya fast setting extra thin cement as my primary glue. I take the parts and fit them together. I make sure they are properly aligned, which is super important here as the part fit is often kind of sloppy. And once aligned, I touch the cement to the seam and let capillary action run it around. I like to maintain moderate pressure on the parts so the dissolving plastic of the parts merges and dries as one piece. This also helps the melting plastic fill slight gaps between the parts, minimizing filling and cleanup that you'll have to do afterwards. Even with proper cleanup and gluing techniques, it's important you always pay attention to the seams and make sure that you scrape and sand them away. The diesel from the kit comes with a lot of chromed pieces. I very, very rarely use the chromed pieces in a kit. All the chrome on these pieces is going to be stripped by dropping them into some super clean. I find, except for the most highly polished items, kit chrome looks out of scale to models. That's why I take it off. Super Clean does a fantastic job of this. Just soak them for about an hour and all the chrome will be gone. And just like that, it's that simple. The chrome is off the parts. Super Clean will also take paint off of parts safely, but that's a story for another day. I told you the kit sucks, and right in the very first part, the engine, I'm already having the issues that I knew were coming. The motor has plenty of issues. The alternator has no definitive connection, and the instructions are super vague about its alignment. The air pump is held on with a small pin and no really decent place to attach it. It's more like a dent, really. I knocked this damn thing off the engine at least a dozen times during this build. The belts on the motor are stupidly thick. I'm going to cut them off and replace them with some thin tape, which I'll use to make better looking fan belts. But you could also scrape them down and sand them down to make them look better. With the engine built, I can now go ahead and paint it. I'm just going to use a flat green Tamiya paint here and brush it on. I am not the kind of guy who sweats precise, exact colors. So this is plenty close for me, even though I am aware it's not 100% accurate Detroit diesel color. So, listen, please, don't hate on me for it. Once the motor is done and dry, I'm going to go ahead and give it a coat of clear coat to give it a nice glossy sheen. So before I go too much further, I'm going to have to decide what the final look is going to be. I'm going to go for a super clean, fairly young rig. It'll have some light grime and weathering, but it will clearly look like an in-service fire engine. The one exception will be the body paint, as I want it to be super bright and shiny. Fire vehicles are notoriously well maintained, but they do live a very hard life, and they're going to get beat up and get some rust in spots that the crew can't reach. So, despite the care and love these vehicles get, they are going to show wear and tear, and that's what I'm going to try to represent. I give the motor just a light black wash and the slightest bit of grime. Then I go over it lightly with some rust color using an oil brusher by AK Interactive, and I blend that in. For the exhaust, I cover the entire manifold with the rust color. Then I follow that up with track rust pigment powders. This gives a great, dry, flaky rust look that can't be beat and is super simple to do. I thought building the frame was going to be fairly straightforward, so I didn't hit the record button. And by the time I realized the monumental issues I was going to have, it was too late for me to think about it and go back. But the bottom line is, the frame rails were bent like U's. They were crazy, crazy warped. And I mentioned how bad this kit is, and that's just another example. But with a lot of tape and a lot of glue, I was able to get the frame together and get it looking pretty decent. With the frame, for the most part, together and painted, now I can go ahead and give it a little bit of weathering. I'm just going to hit it up very lightly with the rust-colored oil brusher and blend it in at the rivets and connections. Now I can marry the diesel and the frame. This is another bad area of the kit, as the motor has no real definitive locators, and it sits sloppy on the frame. It's important to make sure the motor is aligned to the frame before gluing it in place. I left the front motor support loose in the frame to help me align the engine before gluing it in place, and that really helped matters here. All in all, I think it's looking amazing, and it's kind of a shame that all of this is never going to be seen again. I still have so many other things to think about, and the frame is getting there, so I'm going to set it aside for now, and I'm going to turn my attention to another major hurdle, the body. The body on the County's engines was substantially different from the kit body. The kit is a great starting point for that, but it's going to need some major modifications. I need to reshape the rear of the engine. I need to create a new upper set of compartments. I need to create a new rear center compartment, raise the hose bed, adjust the bed dividers, and prep the rig to have crosslays. I start by cutting out the center compartment door of the rear panel. Then I'll build the body up according to the kit instructions. I leave off the pump panels and the workings for the booster reels for now. I'm going to go ahead and fabricate the driver's side upper compartments that I need. Now, my past experience with this kit is actually going to be a downfall here. I have built these compartments before, but I have never modified the rear of the truck from the squared end to the slanted one. So, as I build these compartments, I'm actually going to build them wrong for what I'm trying to do here today. I'm going to build them the way I did in the past. Despite the fact that I'm going to do this wrong, we can go ahead and talk about the process of making these cabinets. I'm going to get the measurements, and then I'm going to cut the parts I need out of some thick styrene. For the compartment doors, I'm going to use very, very thin styrene to just intimate a door lip. And here you can get a great idea of how these upper compartments will work out. The diamond plate that would go on the lower compartments will actually fit perfectly on top here. You can also see here how the backs of the compartments are square. They need to be sloped to match the rear of the fire engine, and that's where my downfall is going to be. So I have figured out my mistake, and you see here I am starting the build all over again to include new pieces for the passenger side. So here you see it. I've got everything kind of figured out. Got the new version done, and I'm gluing all the parts together and onto the body. A ton of work? Yes. Worth it? Absolutely. Since I'm already knee-deep in scratch building on the body, I can go ahead and turn my attention to extending the height of the hose bed. Our hose beds were taller than come in this kit. So, I'm just going to cut out 3 styrene panels and put them into the bed to raise the bed. I'll give them a little trim at the top to make it look finished and professional, and boom, I've got a higher bed. Now comes the real hell, the pump. Many of my builds of the past had no engine or pump in them. It just seemed a waste of time for something that no one would ever see, so I just skipped them. But here my goal was perfection, so skipping was not on the table. Building the pump is pretty straightforward. Assemble and paint. The trouble then begins with the transfer case. It sits crooked on the pump, it doesn't have a good attachment, and it's just all around difficult to work with. Things get worse when you go ahead and try to mount the pump to the frame. Again, the instructions suck here, providing no real placement guidance, and it just kind of sits on top of the frame. Getting it in place with the two drive shafts and the flywheel is just a real headache. After the battle to install the pump on the frame here, it really reminded me of why I stopped putting them on in the first place. What a headache. I'm telling you, it's just horrible. I did finally get the pump in place, and then I went ahead and gave it the same touch of weathering as the frame, and I can now very, very happily move on from this. For now, I'm going to redirect my focus to another major upgrade, the cab. Our cabs had a wide body, whereas this kit doesn't come with that. While it is possible to scratch build that, it really isn't practical with all of the changes that would need to be made. So when I heard about these cabs from Models by Dave, I jumped all over it. The cab comes with a new divider, front compartment, bumpers, fenders, trim, glass, and for the most part, it's really well done, which is not to say it's without many, many, many issues. First, the cab has what is probably accurate diamond plate, but it's so accurate it doesn't match the scale of the diamond plate in the kit. Very frustrating. Do I have two different sizes of diamond plate? Do I replace the diamond plate on the cab? Do I replace the diamond plate on the kit? In the end, I decided to go with two different scales, but it was really something that rubbed me the wrong way. There were some pretty substantial fit issues with the cab. The windows were very, very thin and difficult to work with, but in the end, the outside of the cab looked right, and it was really going to help make my vision come to life. Using a bit of CA glue, I'll go ahead and glue the fenders onto the body. With the motor and pump both mounted to the frame and everything dry, I'm going to take a break and turn back to it and just make sure that the weathering is the way I like it. Break out the oil brusher again, do a little bit of chipping, and make sure everything is looking perfect. In the final build, you'll understand more why I don't pay this much attention to the frame and the motor and the pump normally. It's such a shame to put this much work into the parts that you're never ever going to see again. Later in the build, I'm going to sadly and painfully find out that I'm going to need to come back and make some modifications to the frame. I wish I had known that at this point, but hey, it is what it is. You just got to fight through it. This putty by AK is my favorite. I love this stuff. It's my go-to filler, and I'm going to put a link to it down below. I almost forgot something very important on the cab. And so, since I'm back over here while the body dries, I can take care of it right now. The resin cab that I bought does not have a front suction compartment. Ours did. It's a little door in the right lower front corner of the cab, and you open the door and inside is the soft suction. So I'm going to make one myself. I'm using label tape to mark out some guidelines, and then I can take a scoring tool and score the edges of the compartment door. If you're a model builder and you don't have some label tape in your arsenal, you need to get some. I start by making the compartment lines using my X-Acto knife. Later I'll switch to a Tamiya scoring knife to make them a little bit wider. All the glue on the body is dry, so now I can go ahead and break out my plastic putty and do some filling. Why do I like this stuff so much? Well, first of all, it goes on very nicely, it dries really hard, and while it's wet, you can smooth it out and work it with a moistened finger or a damp brush. I love this stuff. While things are really moving along, this is kind of like a turning point right here. We are at the point where we start doing a little sanding, a little filling, a little priming, a little sanding, filling, priming, sanding, filling, priming, sanding, filling, priming, and so on and so forth. Everybody's favorite, am I right? Hey, but it does mean we're really moving forward now. So it's kind of an exciting spot to be in, even though it's going to be a hassle and a lot of work. Now it's time for some more casting. The pump panels in the kit are completely wrong for our fire engines. So I'm going to have to make my own. I'm going to start by making molds of the original pump panels. I don't want to just ruin these in case I have an issue. I have something to go back to. So I'm going to make molds of the originals and make some resin casts of the originals to begin with. While the mold cures, I can get back to work sanding. There's a lot of it, and the cab really had its issues and totally needed a lot of sanding, but it's going to pay off in the end because I'm really going to shoot for a super nice, flat, glossy, shiny paint job here. With the primer on the body, you can see how it's all really starting to come together. You'll also notice I'm not having to worry about compartment door handles, as I'm replacing those with photo etched ones. So the existing ones are gone. Okay, so the molds dried, and I took the original parts out and put them away for safekeeping. And now I'm going to just cast some new panels with some resin, and then I can use those as the parts that I'm going to modify and create my own pump panels. I'm using a product called Smoothcast 65D by Smooth-On to cast these pump panels. This is a very quick setting resin. You have to move quickly, but you still have to make sure you mix it thoroughly. You can see it going white in the cup. That means it's already starting to cure. You don't have a lot of time here. After getting it thoroughly mixed, I pour it into my molds, let it flow around, and then let it cure. It literally cures in like 15 minutes. Very, very fast. To glue the bases for the lights on the rear of the cab, I'm going to again turn to some labeling tape. And I'm just going to use it kind of like a straight edge, run it across the cab. That way I make sure I get the lights in the right place. And with that tape in place, I can now go ahead and glue the bases on and make sure that they're going to be in the right place and equal. As long as I'm in the cab mode, I might as well work on the interior. So I'm going to get out all the parts that I need, clean them up, and start getting the cab put together. Again, the resin kit comes with new parts for the interior so that they'll fit and work properly with the new cab, but they're not without their own set of problems. Sometimes the parts don't fit right and they take some modification, and you have to kind of work things out as you go. Alright, for the most part the cab interior is built. I'll set it aside to dry and we can check on our pump panels. So the Smoothcast, as you see, does cure into a nice hard white plastic, and it looks like we're good to go here. To make sure everything's good to go, I'll give it a quick pokey poke, and you can tell that it's hard and solid. So yeah, I can take my pump panels out. Now, these are just replicas of the original pump panel. And you can see there, I actually overfilled the mold a little bit. So I made these a little bit too thick. Something to just think of. It's not a big deal. I can sand these down. And especially it's not a big deal because these are going to be templates for the pump panel I'm really trying to make. But yeah, look at that. A perfect duplicate of the original pump panel, ready for me to modify like a crazy man. So it's time to get back to work on the pump panel. And as you can see here, I've taken the resin ones I made and I've sanded off all the details I wouldn't need anymore. And now I'm going to cast new ones from these pieces with no details on them so that I can use those to make my own pump panels. Again, I'm just going to put them in a mold box and I'm going to use some Oomoo to make the silicone molds, and then I'll use the Smoothcast again to cast new parts with no details except the ones I wanted to keep. With my new featureless pump panels out of the molds, I can now go ahead and start to build them up. I'm going to start by taking a Sharpie and marking out the locations of all the features I'm going to need, such as the gauges, where the charging handles go, where the discharge ports and the like all should be. Now I'm using a variety of circle punches and some very thin sheet styrene, and I'm punching out a ton of different shapes and circles that I can use to build up the pump panel. I now have a big surplus of shapes and different sizes that I can use, and I'm simply super gluing these onto the pump panel that I made earlier. These will be the basis for things like gauges and any other raised detail I'm going to need. When this is all done, I'm going to use it as a master to cast a brand new pump panel. So it's important that I sand everything down and I fill the seams and edges to make sure that the resin doesn't creep underneath the details that I've added. Everything is looking really good here. I've filled gaps, I've thrown some primer on here, I've done some sanding. I'm really beginning to feel the pump panel. So now I'm just adding some tubes to act as discharge ports. For right now, I'm making the tubes extra long. I'll trim them down after everything else is settled, and then I can make sure I'm getting them to the length that I like. I need to remove a section from both pump panels for the crosslays. To do that and make it accurate, I'm first going to remove the excess plastic in the body that will be where the crosslays are going to go. I'll cut those off with a Japanese saw, remove the parts, then I can fit the pump panels into their place and mark out the spots with a Sharpie. As long as I'm working on the hose bed here, I might as well go ahead and put in the divider. I simply cut a piece out of sheet styrene, smooth it off, and glue it in place. In a build like this, you can see how one thing leads to another, and since I'm putting dividers in the crosslay bed, I might as well put dividers in the rear hose bed. The kit comes with a round tank fill, and ours had a square one, and since I'm back here working on the dividers anyhow, I go ahead and form a square tank fill out of some styrene and then glue it in place. With the dividers in and the pump panel looking good for now, I'm going to go ahead and do some measurements on the cab so I can make the decals I'm going to need for this build. I'll just rough out a quick sketch, figure out what decals I need, where they're going to go, then I'll go ahead and take a ruler, get the measurements off the real cab so I can transcribe it and make the decals to the right size. To make my decals, I like to work in Illustrator. I find it the most flexible. I can easily scale things both up and down if I need to. So it's the app for me, and I'm well versed in it. I can always move the file over into Photoshop later if that's where I need to be, but I like to knock things out originally in Illustrator. I found that Adobe's apps can be a little bit spendy, but fortunately for people like me, Adobe has put out a subscription service where I have access to all of their applications for a monthly fee. And because I am a big computer guy, I do a lot of graphics work, and I love Illustrator and Photoshop, this is really, really a bargain for me. And if you are like me, this might be the way to go for you. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do have other videos on making decals, and I'm going to put a link to those below. But I made these decals using my HP laser printer and Ghost White toner. Now it's hard to see, but the Engine 14 logos need a white outline, and this proved to be exceptionally difficult because of the registration issues. I could not get the white border to be equal around the blue number. So I ended up doing a little bit of a workaround in that I printed duplicate decals, sets in just white and sets in just the blue, and I layered the decals on the engine. This was really the only way to get the white border to work out the way I wanted it to. With the decals printed out and ready to go, I can turn my attention elsewhere. And in this instance, I'm going to fill the slots in the fenders in the kit and even in the resin cab kit that I bought. There are grooves in the fenders for these little chrome trim pieces. Well, ours had the whole front half of the fender coated in like a stainless steel sheet, and so these little inserts weren't going to work. I'm using a little epoxy putty, mix it thoroughly, fill the gaps, and then let it dry. Once the epoxy putty is mostly cured, I can take a sharp razor knife and trim away a lot of the excess. This is going to save me a lot of sanding after it's fully cured. So I'm feeling good about the pump panel, I'm feeling good about the decals and the fenders, so I might as well turn my attention to the interior again. I've painted it mostly flat black because that was the color of our interiors, and now I'm just going to do a lot of detailing work. I'm going to paint in all the gauges, and this is one place I am going to use some of the stuff I got from 3 Inches Under. They sent a nice little radio stack that seems to be appropriate for our vehicles. So I'm going to do a lot of cleanup, glue it all together, paint it, and install it. I've got the radio stack, the microphone, and the speaker, and they're all going to add a lot of nice detail to the vehicle. Even though they're not perfect, they're in the cab, they're hard to see, they're going to be perfect. It seems like it's taken forever to get to this point, but we can finally take the model over to the paint booth and start getting ready to make it yellow. I'll give it a final coat of Tamiya Fine Primer, and then I'm going to use some Tamiya X8 with a little bit of red added to it to make the paint. As I do with all of my paint jobs, I begin by applying a tack coat, then medium coats, and then some wet coats. As I'm trying to get a really beautiful finish here, I am going to use self-leveling thinner to thin down the paint. The problem is I can't cook this to cure it faster, which means I'm going to have to leave this sit for quite a while to make sure it's fully cured and I don't put a bunch of fingerprints in it. Back in 1987, the paint jobs on our fire trucks was a little more of an orange yellow as opposed to what I'm putting on here, which is more our modern day color. Oh, the hellish nightmare of this kit continues with these horrible wheels and tires. So they look alright and everything, but the wheels and tires never really mate well. And so invariably you're always going to find some guy with his tires falling off of the wheels and it just doesn't look right. And I almost went the way I always had before and was going to have the same problem. And then I finally decided I needed to do something different. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to end up filling the tires with some rolled up paper towels to make sure that the tires maintain some shape to them, and then I'm actually going to put some beads of glue between the tire and the wheels to try and help hold everything together and to keep its shape. With the original yellow paint cured, I can go ahead and start to put on the decals. As I said, to get the white borders, it was just easier for me to make 2 sets of decals. I laid down the white set, let them dry, then I laid down the other set, and I got this beautiful setup that looks exactly like it should. Once the decals have dried thoroughly, I can now go ahead and lay down some clear coat. For this build, I'm going to be using some urethane clear coat from Bright Vision. I love this stuff. It's easy to work with. It is amazingly shiny and dries really, really hard. Like the paint, I'll apply this in layers, starting with a tack coat, then some medium coats, and then the trick is to lay this down in a very smooth wet coat but not get any runs in it. If you do it right, this is the kind of result that you can get. This beautiful, beautiful glossy finish. Overall, I would say that the paint and the clear coat is 90% perfect. It's that other 10% that I can't live with. And so I'm going to do something that I'm really, really afraid of doing. I've never done it before, at least not on a model. I've done it on a real car. But I'm going to go ahead and color sand this finish. To do that, I'm going to be using some fine grit Tamiya sanding sponges, and I'm going to very, very lightly sand the entire model, focusing on where the decals are to get rid of any ridges and make them just blend right into the body. Am I afraid? Yes. Why? Because I think it looked amazing right out of the clear coat. But I think I can do better, so I'm going to try this and hope I don't have to go back and repaint the entire model. So with the sanding sponges, I'm going to wet sand the entire fire truck. And as I said, I'm going to pay special attention to where the decals are, because I'm trying to make sure there's no visible ledge there between the decal and the rest of the clear coat. So I've got to sand, and I've got to be really careful that I don't burn right through the clear coat, because even though I put like 6 coats on, it's still very, very thin. Now that everything is sanded and smooth, I need to get the shine back. And to do that, it's going to take a lot of polishing. Now, I will do some polishing with Q-tips, but for the most part, I'm going to be using my rotary tool, a very clean, soft buffing wheel, and Tamiya polishing compounds. I'm going to stick with the fine and finish compounds. Starting with the fine, I'll put it on the model, and I'll go ahead and polish everything up with the rotary tool, keeping things moving so it doesn't get too hot, and so I don't burn through the paint on any of the corners or edges. Once the finish is back to where I want it, I can move on, and later I'm going to put something else on to bring even more shine out. So here I am doing more stuff that I really just never do. I'm working with some chrome bare metal foil, and you can see I've already put the chrome strip around the cab, which it wasn't as hard as I thought, but it was still way hard, at least for me, not being a bare metal foil guy. But in the end, I think it came out amazing. I'm also now using bare metal foil to represent the aluminum plates we had on the front half of our fenders. I'm simply wrapping and burnishing and making sure it's trimmed and smooth all the way around. Yes, bare metal foil is an art form, and maybe after this project I might take some scrap model kits and practice a lot of different bare metal foil techniques so I'm not as intimidated as I was here. At the end of the day, after all the color sanding and polishing and bare metal foil, I think the cab really is starting to shine. Did I mention that this is the build from hell? If not, allow me to do so now as I move forward and put the window glass in. The window glass that came with the resin cab is really just vacuum formed. It's very thin. It's got a lot of slop on it, and frankly, it was really difficult to work with. Didn't like it one little bit, still don't like it, but it's all I had and I had to make it work. I'm now going to go ahead and paint the rubber molding around the window openings, and frankly, it doesn't go great. It's a real pain in the butt. I'm trying to tape it off here, and I still end up getting some slop around it, and I end up having to do a lot of cleanup afterwards to try and make it look right. I probably should have done something like used the black bare metal foil or something here rather than try and paint it. But in the end, it actually comes out all right. It just was the long way around, really. I mean, I went the long way around here. One of the absolute worst parts of this kit is the way the cab and the body unite. Most people building this kit get it wrong and don't have it connected properly. I know how it's done because like I said, I've built this about 1,000,000 times. And it's tough enough just using the kit parts. But when I'm using this resin cab, it was virtually impossible. I'm trying not to damage the vehicle. I'm trying to get it done. And it was just a battle royale. And what a headache. Caused me a lot of issues. Ended up having me to have to go back and do a lot of touch-up and repair work. Such a nightmare. So here's a great look at how these pieces need to go together. You see these little tabs on the engine compartment. And here's the center divider. Well, a lot of people just have it sit either on top of it or below it, and it actually kind of needs to thread in there. And so let me just try and get this all lined up the way it's supposed to be. See how it kind of goes over the first tabs and then under the second tabs? This is the correct way for these two parts to go together. And let me tell you something. It's really, really hard to do. There it is. See? That is exactly how that's supposed to go together. So I painted my trim pieces and diamond plate and stuff like that using all clad, and it came out really nice. But it just didn't have the look I was going for. So I'm using this chrome powder. And basically all you do is just kind of brush it on with a Q-tip and rub it in, polish it up, and you get a really great chrome look. And in the end, I did this on all of the chrome trim, and I was really happy with the results. So it's basically all clad and then this, and that gave me a really nice, consistent, even finish on all of my diamond plate and trim. If I were forced to knock this in any way, shape, or form, the knock would be that it's a little too dark for me. I think it should be lighter. But other than that, I really think it worked out well. So, let me show you something about the tires real quick. Here is an original tire. Here is my tire. See the difference? I think it looks a lot more realistic, and all I did is I painted the tires with this Tamiya NATO Black. I use it on a lot of tires in a lot of projects, and I think it really has a nice look. And look at the chassis right now. Tell me that just is not working wonderfully. So as I said, all the tires are getting the NATO black paint job, and again, a little mistake on my part in that I probably should have painted these before putting them on the vehicle. I didn't, so now I have to do it, and I have to be careful rather than just being able to hit it up with the paintbrush. But hey, it's going to pay off, and the wheels are going to look amazing. If it weren't such a hassle, what I really should do for my display is I should get another kit and build an entire second chassis just like this to display next to the finished kit so that you can see all of this stuff underneath it. So here we are. We're about to go ahead and marry the body and the chassis together. It's a big moment, and this is really starting to feel like a fire truck. But of course, it's not going to just simply go together. We're going to have issues. I'm going to have to trim down some parts on the pump that are a little bit too long, and that's simply because the body has a weird little bow to it in that it's kind of pinched in at the bottom. And so it's a little bit too tight to get it in there without breaking a bunch of stuff. As you see, I'm actually just taking off some of the diamond plate here to give me a little bit more room to work and try and get this together without just breaking everything. And I gotta tell you, at this point, the hassles that you run into are magnified because you're trying not to destroy your paint job or other sections. See, I broke a wheel off, now I've got to take that off. You know, and it's just really, really difficult finding a place to grab it, not leave fingerprints, not smear something, not break something. Yeah, it's just a hassle. But in the end, I hope it comes out all right. And yes, things are actually going to get worse here as I realize that somehow the resin kit, the panels are too long for it. So I'm actually going to snap the cab off, set it to the side, because I'm going to have to trim the engine compartment panels to make everything sit properly. So I'm going to take that off, kind of break those parts off, set the cab apart. I'm going to have to trim those down, and I'll put it all together later. But yeah, 3 steps backwards, 1 step forward. Ah, damn. So I'm actually going to have to remove about 1/8 of an inch off of each of these panels to make this all work out right. Yeah, just these little hidden things. And when you take and add so much to a kit, and there's so many new pieces and parts that were not originally intended to be there, these are the problems you're going to run into. And all you can do is fight through it and find a way to make it work. And yes, I stabbed myself in both thumbs in virtually the same place. What I will do for you guys. So, more chrome, more super clean. Now I'm getting pieces ready to go ahead and spray with some all-clad, glue in the air horns together, and going to do some filling on those. I'm going to get all these mounted up so I can go over and paint and treat them. The funny part is, half the stuff that you're seeing here isn't going to get used. You know, I mentioned earlier how sometimes the chrome is out of place unless it's a part that's usually highly polished. I'll avoid using it. Well, I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to use a kit chrome debumper. I had an extra one, so I'm going to use that. And the mirrors are so bad in this kit that I'm going to make most of the parts of the mirrors myself, so those aren't going to get used. There's a lot of stuff happening here that I'm not going to use. I ordered some styrene sheets of diamond plate, and I'm cutting out a bunch of the pieces I need. I'm going to have to make some parts for the steps. I'm going to have to make some panels to go over the rear compartment doors, and I'm going to have to make a piece to go behind the grab rail on the rear of the truck. So this stuff is actually closer in scale to what the kit has. It may not be 1/25th like the rest of the kit, but hey, it's how the cab should have been, in my opinion. Now, like I said, I had some extra parts, and it's going to come into play right here because this panel is not going to fit properly with the extended part of the back where I did the modification. So I got an extra piece and I cut an end off so that I could put the two together to make this one piece, and it worked out great. But if you don't have that, you're going to have to think of something here. It's going to be tough, but this worked out having that extra piece. So I was going to extend the steps and make them longer to fill a giant gap here between the firefighter seats and the steps. I ended up deciding not to do that, and I just made some new little walls that I glued in between the firefighter seats and the steps, and I just slid them in with some glue, let it dry, and now I'm just painting that to match the rest of the interior. The ladders are one area that always needs a ton of cleanup, and in fact, when I did mine, I painted them, and you could still see flash and seam lines, so I ended up having to go back and redo it because it just wasn't working. I'm getting really close on the build, and so now it's time to just really hunker down and start doing a lot of the detail work. Here I am putting on door handles, grab rails are going on, air horns will be going on, things like that. All the stuff that's going to make this really just pop. You absolutely need to have some of this Tester's glass glue. I use it for my lenses and gluing in my windows. It's essentially like a thin, watered down, probably like an Elmer's or something. It dries really clear, and so you can put it behind your lenses, stick them in, they stay, they glue, they dry, and it's clear and it looks fantastic. So make sure you have some of this on hand. I use it a lot. Here's something that I end up not being 100% satisfied with. These are photo etch slam locks for the compartment door handles, and they look amazing. And this is going to work out really great because it's going to allow me to have matching handles up on the scratch-built compartments, and they're going to look very realistic, and it's going to be fantastic. What I didn't realize is that these were really, really thick. And so when I glue them onto the compartments, they stand a little too proud for me. They really needed to be countersunk, or maybe even drill a hole and put them in the hole or something like that. I just didn't like the way they sit, but there was just really no way to fix it at this point. So I had no option but to press ahead, get these put onto the compartments. As with any photo etch piece, you cut them off, and then you sand off the little burr, make sure it's all set, and then you glue the part onto the vehicle. Again, out comes my label tape, and I'm going to use that to help me align the locks and make sure that they're all at the same plane, because nothing would look worse than having these things all over the place. So by using this tape, I can go ahead and get a nice straight edge right on the model and make sure that everything is going to line up perfectly. While each photo etch piece needs to be in the correct exact location, the little handle in the photo etch piece should not all be perfectly horizontal. That's unrealistic. They're never like that. Look at any fire truck you see that has these kind of handles, and some are a little turned to the right, some are turned to the left, some are horizontal. They're all over the place. So I actually made sure that mine were a little bit off one way or the other, but make sure that the lock itself is all in the same place on the compartment. So I'm going to use this yellow masking tape to make 5-inch hose. Now I tried just folding it and it worked like crap, okay? It did not work. What I had to eventually do is make a core out of some Pentaflex folders. I cut strips to length and then I wrapped it with this tape and it worked out great. Now here's a piece I tried wrapping it around some fabric and it was too thick and puffy. That didn't work. This was the answer right here. This is the paper insert. It helped fold it up nice. It allows me to fold this hose. It gives me the right thickness. It makes it easy to wrap it up in the tape. This was the perfect way to make 5-inch hose for these. So if you're going to look to do 5-inch hose, cut yourself some strips. I think I went to like 8 millimeters in the width on the strips. Maybe I'll put a little graphic down below with the exact measurement I used here. And then I just cut a piece of tape and I wrap it around this. Works out fantastic. Makes great hose. So while I'm working on this fire hose, let me say this is not my idea. I got so many tips and tricks from the amazing modelers at the Facebook page Model Fire Apparatus Any Scale, especially these gentlemen, Dave Gusky, Jeffrey Vielchapolsky, and Jody Covey. These guys are amazing modelers, and they have fire truck building down to an art form. And they talked about doing the different kinds of hose with the elastic cord and the tape. In the past, I always just used shoelaces and always ended up hating it. It was better than nothing, but it just never looked right to me. Thanks to these guys, I got so many tips. this build really would not be possible if it weren't for these guys. The thin piece of board inside the hose here, it really doesn't add a ton of thickness, but it adds just enough to make it look more realistic. But the real thing is, it makes it possible to wrap the tape around and get a consistent thickness and make it nice and smooth and look right. So really, you need to put something in the middle of your hose to get it to come out correctly. Now I'm getting out some foam core to make a couple things. First of all, I need to make some inserts for the hose bed so I don't have to make an entire hose bed of hose. I'm going to fill up the bottom and the rear of the hose bed with these inserts so that I only need to put on just a couple layers at the top. I'm also going to make some stand-in hose beds so I can make the hose loads off of the model and then just transfer them and slide them into the engine. This is going to work out great, and if you don't do it this way, you're going to just have nothing but nightmares. You're going to be breaking parts off the model. It's going to be just awful. So here I have my hose bed stand-in, and I'm folding and gluing the hose and just basically going back and forth. And I'm going to make every piece separately so that I keep the tape seams facing down and you don't see them. So I'm going to make a length, and then I'm going to make another length, and then another length, and then another length, and I'm going to glue them in separately. And then at the top, I'll have to do some creative zigzagging to make sure everything works out okay. You might notice we hadn't talked much more about the pump panel, and that's for a reason. I found a bunch of amazing things you could get on Shapeways that would really take this build over the top. So I put together an order, and I got my parts and just had to wait for them. So now that they're here, I can go ahead and start cleaning all those up, and I can finish my pump panel and put it on and really add a lot of detail to this model. I'm here to tell you the stuff from Shapeways is amazing. I got a deck gun that I needed. I got 5-inch valves, and I got hose couplings, and I got double females and Ys, and you name it, I got it. And the stuff it's like the real thing, but tiny. It's amazing stuff. I was so excited when I got this stuff. Just amazing, amazing stuff. So I've got the pump panel. It's been primed, it's been sanded, and now it's been painted and clear coated, and frankly, it looks amazing. I'm so happy with this. Now, I just need to throw on all the details that are really going to make this thing sing, and to start that, I'm going to put down some decals I made to represent real gauge faces and the plates for all the charging handles. So, again, I printed them out of my HP printer, I've cut them out, and I'm just applying them where they belong. With every step I take with this pump panel, I get more and more excited. It's looking amazing. The decals really work. Now I'm taking some trim rings that I printed in my 3D printer, and I'm gluing them down around the decals to give them a little finished edge. Later I'll go back and treat those with some Molotov chrome, but right now I'm filling inside the trim rings with a little bit of the Tester's clear window glue. You simply fill the entire area, let it dry, and lo and behold, you've got a lens over your gauge. This works amazing for making realistic gauges. Well, with a few minor exceptions, here is the near complete pump panel. All I still need to do is do a little detail painting on like the 5-inch valve. I need to install the charging handles, but man, is it looking good. I've got very, very realistic looking gauges. The pump panel looks like it's supposed to look for engine 14. It really came out good, and now that I've got molds of this, I can make more if I need to. The final detail for the pump panel is the charging handles. And I used an old set of marker lights. I flipped them over, drilled little holes in them, and put pieces of wire in there, and they made perfect charging handles. So now I'm just using a pin vise to drill tiny holes in the pump panel so I can put the charging handles in place. Okay, so most of the hose has been folded and loaded into the vehicle, with the exception of the final few wraps, which I need to do once they're in the vehicle so that I can get them right and make sure they look correct. So I've got that sitting here. I'm very happy with the way it all came out, and now it's just a matter of doing some of the final little bits of detail. I'm using nozzles and couplings that I got from Shapeways, cleaning the pieces up, making sure the opening at the base is wide enough to take the hose that I'm using, and then I will just kind of fold it, put a little CA glue inside the nozzle and tuck it in there and let it dry. It's going to work out great. With the booster line ready to go, the last thing I want to do is put another coat of paint on it and then put some washes on it to just make it look a little bit more realistic. So I've got it all set up and I'm just kind of running a little bit more paint on it to make sure it looks right. As you can see, the deck gun is mounted, the ladders are in place, and I'm just now finishing up the hose loads. Here's one of my nozzles. It's attached to the hose, it's painted. And it's important when you're putting these nozzles on the hose, think about how they're going to be laying in the bed so that you have the fold in the end of the hose that you need to make to get it into the nozzle. You've got that facing down. That way the hose looks round and it looks correct as it's attached to the nozzle. Otherwise it'll look weird. So you got to think about that in advance. So I'm just going to do a little bit of touch-up paint here, and then I'm going to throw this thing into the hose bed, and then that hose load will be done. A little bit more detail work. This is an axe from Shapeways, and I'm just doing a little bit of paint job on it. And then I'll set that aside to dry, and later on I'll mount those to the cab. On my work table in front of me, you can see one of my Halligan bars. That's going to mount on the rear step, just like ours was. And boy, I'll tell you what, the Shapeways stuff really has made this thing amazing. It's starting to look like a fire truck. I really love the paint job, but sadly, I got to put some chips on it because I do want this to look like a working vehicle. So I'm going to chip up around some of the high use points, like where the firefighters go in and out of the jump seats and around the hose bed and stuff like that. So I'm just taking a little silver paint and just very, very judiciously putting little dots of it to represent the chips. So now I'm just cleaning up the engine and I'm applying a ceramic coating to the finish to give it a really great shine. And I'm just going to kind of rub it on with a Q-tip, let it dry, haze up, and then I'll buff it off with a very soft cloth. I have the equipment loaded up top and in the rear compartment, foam jugs, all the fun little accessories. And now I'm just doing a little bit of a pin wash on the rear hose and around some of the hose beds and things to give it a little bit more realism. So we're just about done with this build. It has been a long, long, winding road, but I'm feeling very good about things. I've got all the hose that I made outside of the truck, and I've put it into the hose beds, except for the last couple layers that I'm just going to lay down and glue in place with their nozzles and or couplings attached. Again, I can't speak highly enough about the stuff I got from Shapeways. I got 2.5-inch couplings, I got 5-inch couplings, and I got a variety of different assortments of nozzles and appliances to use here. And it all just is really pushing this build over the top. Simply put it in place, paint it all up, and it looks amazing. Anyhow, I think we can about call this one done. And now we can just sit back and take a really good close look at what we've done. I hope you love it, because I sure do. Well, there it is. Clark County Fire Department's Engine 14 in all its glory. It was a lot of work, a lot of challenges, super fun, but in the end, I think it came out awesome. I hope you think it too. If you do, please give it a giant thumbs up, click subscribe, and click the notification bell. I really think I deserve it after this build. Until next time, just remember, great works are not performed by strength, but by perseverance. Until next time, this is Paul from Fat Guy Productions saying be good.